Why is it not recording? Hello again. I'm Tripp Rogers. He's the Hall of Famer Mike Sheck, and we are the Fantasy Sultans. Welcome to Week 6 in the NFL. And Mike, the injuries continue to mount. We're going to give you some plug and play in order to get you through Week 6, and we also have a couple of teams on bye this week. First of all, sir, how is your fantasy season going?
Well, not so good. But, I mean, it is early, and it's not about how you start. It's about how you finish. And I just think that, in one of the leagues, I avoided 0-5, which is a good thing. And just not going planned as accordingly. But, it's a work in progress. It is a work in progress.
But we're having fun, right? We're having fun.
Oh, we are having fun. We are having fun.
And more importantly, we could have a Seinfeld reunion in our midst soon, according to Jerry. Ooh, yep. That's a show.
Hey, you know what a show is?
What's a
Jonathan
show?
Taylor coming back. That is a show, but it wasn't his performance on the field. He's back in action. Back to playing, but he was limited. You know who stole the show was Zach Moss, who ran his way for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns for the Indianapolis Colts.
Yep.
The 49ers, they thumped the Cowboys on Sunday night 42-10. And I have to say right now, Tripp, they are the most complete team in the NFL. Sorry, Philadelphia Eagles, but the 49ers are winning convincingly, and they're winning big against good teams. Another team that's under the radar.
I have to agree with you on this, because if you were watching that game, you were watching that game Sunday night. Dallas was no slouch.
No.
Dallas is not a slouch, but it's almost as if you've got the Niners on this level and you've got the Eagles are there, but I don't know. This is a 49er team that has had to spend the off season and there's a fire in there. And these 49ers are really good. Philadelphia and the Niners, I mean, I think those are the two best teams in the NFC. And we thought Dallas was, but Dallas showed us what they're made of. They're terrible.
Detroit, they are flying under the radar in the NFC. There's a guy by the name of David Montgomery who's running hard. And they don't need Amon-Ra St. Brown. Case in point, last week, Josh Reynolds filled in and stepped up. He's had 291 yards on the season, 3 touchdowns. Another team that just keeps on rolling, the Miami Dolphins. Devin Achane and Tyreek Hill, they are putting up big numbers. But, of course, Achane got injured last week, and he will be missing a few games with a knee injury. Not the only player, though, to suffer injury last week. Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones, Khalil Herbert, Justin Jefferson, Travis Kelce, all among the big players that had some injuries. And you know what? For Justin Jefferson, he goes to IR. That's a 4-week injury. Anthony Richardson is going to be at least a couple of weeks, if not more.
I heard he went. I heard he went IR. I heard he was put on IR today.
Okay,
I read that on ESPN.
I mean,
he went on IR for 4 games.
So you're talking about some major, and we're going to help you out here coming up in just a little bit with our import exports. You're going to need to go to the waiver wire because, in your league, if you also have a IR spot, you could also use that and open up a bench position and pick up a player off the waiver wire.
Pro and con about the Kelce injury. It's a positive that, I mean, you don't want to see a player injured. He did come back and play on Sunday, but here is the upside of the Kelce injury. He is going to play Thursday night. So conceivably, you could find out, again, if you find out when the inactives are, and if he's inactive for that game, you could go and get yourself someone, or you may want to try and get yourself a tight end because you're probably going to need him down the road. I mean, Kelce is a unique player, and we're not talking about his dating habits either. We're talking. By the way, have you listened to that New Heights podcast with Travis and Jason Kelce? It ranks
No, I
with
have
the
not, but I heard
Sultans.
it's really good.
It ranks up with the Sultans. I'm telling you, it ranks up with the Sultans. The only difference is they are brothers. We are not. We are brothers in spirit, shall we say? The other thing coming off of week 5, and you mentioned a bunch of the injuries. Some big players were injured, and Justin Jefferson, probably consensus number 1 pick, is going to be out for a minimum of 4 games. Now, the positive for this is he'll come back and he'll be back in the lineup. But the question is going to be, will the Minnesota Vikings be in any shape? And rumors continue to fly that they're going to Kirk Cousins may get traded, because Cousins, in the last year of his contract, the Vikings may decide to just throw in the towel this season and trade him to try and get something. Because do you think Kirk Cousins is going to re-sign with Minnesota?
No, I don't think so, but I don't know if they're going to, turn everything in and say, hey, that's it. And I've heard a lot of people saying they're going to shut down Justin Jefferson for the season. I don't agree. I mean, they have the Bears, the 49ers, Packers, and Falcons in the next 4 games. There's 2 winnable games on that card. So at that point, they could have 3 wins before Justin Jefferson comes back. And everybody says, well, if the Minnesota Vikings are they're done without Justin Jefferson. I don't agree with that either. They have other playmakers on offense. Jordan Addison stepping up. KJ Osborne will be stepping up. They've got TJ Hawkinson. They've got Kirk Cousins. Yeah, I could see possibly Minnesota wanting to trade Cousins, but at the same time, their season isn't quite over yet. Let's not throw the towel in on them just yet.
All right, let's throw the towel into the ring right now. Exports, that's what we do. That's the kind of thing we do here on the Fantasy Sultans. And Mr. Sheck, I'll let you lead off this week.
All right, well, I'm going to start with 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers that can help you out this week. With the running backs in Chicago, Donta Foreman. Starting running back Khalil Herbert, I mentioned it. He suffered a high ankle sprain, expected to miss a few games. Rashawn Johnson left the game last week with a concussion, so that leaves the Bears pretty thin. And at least Foreman turns in a maybe number 2 running back position. If not, he becomes the starter if Rashawn Johnson cannot play. He's proven to be a reliable person, Donta Foreman, in the past 2 seasons with Carolina. Tennessee, he's been very dependable. 5 games with Carolina when they traded Christian McCaffrey away to the 49ers. Donta Foreman put in at least 11 fantasy points. Again, 10 fantasy points with Tennessee the year before that. So he is a reliable person who can get the job done. Jeff Wilson for the Miami Dolphins is another one you want to have on your radar. Oh, Mr. Wilson. Yeah, that's right. Devin Achane, he is out this week with a knee injury. Miami needs a replacement. They're activating Wilson off of IR, who was nursing an injury. Raheem Mostert's going to be the guy. He's going to be the starter, but I wouldn't be surprised to see those 2 mix it up a little bit more often, because I'll tell you what, in 8 games, he had 84 carries for 392 yards and 3 touchdowns last year for the 49ers. So, again, a nice 1-2 mix for Mostert and Wilson. That should be the plan for the Dolphins. We go to the wide receivers, and an obvious replacement for Justin Jefferson becomes KJ Osborne. I talked about him. Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. Yep, they're going to see a spike in their numbers. Well, you know what? I also believe that KJ Osborne will see an uptick as well. Who's going to benefit the greatest? I still say it is TJ Hawkinson, but Osborne should get the production. He had 5 catches for 49 yards against Kansas City, scored 2 touchdowns already this season. He's worth adding in leagues. This is a 4-week injury for Jefferson, but you never know with nagging hamstring injuries. It could plague him throughout the season, and you just never know. So it's going to be a wait and see game to see what happens with Jefferson. And a final import, Josh Downs of Indianapolis. Gardner Minshew, he is in relief of Anthony Richardson. We talked about Richardson going to IR. Well, Minshew has already played in 3 games this season, week 2, 3, and 5. And the streak continues this week and for the foreseeable future until Richardson gets back in action. In those games, Downs has been Minshew's go-to guy. He's had 7, 13, and 15 PPR points during that period. And what do they say? As the old saying goes, lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. That's right. Gardner Minshew is going to need a friend, and that is Josh Downs.
Bill
All right,
Withers,
two imports, or
1971.
2 exports, I should say.
Bill Withers, 1971. There you go. I just have to throw that in there, buddy.
Bill Withers. 2 exports. I have Tyler Higbee for the Los Angeles Rams, Cooper Kupp with him back in action, and the emergence of Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell. I don't figure Higbee to see much action. Just last week, 2 catches on 3 targets. Extremely difficult to trust Higbee. And Rashid Shaheed in New Orleans. Tripp, I think, in fact, a couple weeks ago, you said Shaheed would be a good import to pick up. Well, things have changed for that. Rashid has struggled, and that would have been a good import 3 weeks ago. But unfortunately, it has not gone the same for Shaheed since. One would think with New Orleans scoring 34 points last week against New England, that Shaheed's numbers would have been up. Not the case. Shaheed did not see a spike in production, and I would just say export him at this point.
Listen, you have to bring up my mistakes. Thanks. I appreciate it. You're my buddy, man. Oh, let me get that knife out of my back. Excuse me, please. All right, listen. First off, I forgot to mention, and we usually do this at the beginning. Teams on bye this week: Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Packers coming off that Monday night stinko with the Las Vegas Raiders, and you know, I think Green Bay needs a break. Now, Jordan Love, listen, you're going to have some ups and downs with him. I think the injuries, you mentioned injuries in week 5. Aaron Jones was out for Green Bay. So this bye helps them rest up a little bit. And the Pittsburgh Steelers as well. Listen, I'm surprised we don't have a soundtrack here on this podcast, Fire Canada. Because they're doing it everywhere. Hockey games, football games, whatever. All right. First off, I'm going to go with my exports. Number 1, in this one, we advised people to stay away from him this year in fantasy drafts. And based on what we've seen so far, Odell Beckham Jr. I hate to say a player is done, but he's done. I mean, he is really... They were thinking he would really work well with that offense in Baltimore. And Beckham has been injured, and you can't trust him. And we're getting into the part of the season where you need to have guys you can trust. And I think at some point, Baltimore is going to say, okay, moving on, because I mean, OBJ helped the Rams win a Super Bowl a couple seasons ago. Hurt his knee in that Super Bowl. Not been the same since. He's an older player. I think at this point, you may want to move on. Other players with fantasy relevance, even if you go with some rookies, because, again, rookies or younger players are going to pan out. By the way, you mentioned Detroit, and I forgot to throw this in there before, but Jameson Williams is back for them too, and that you're adding more into that mix in Detroit. And this is a guy they're really high on, had his suspension cut. And, of course, we had him as an import last week. The other export, I'm going to say, and we've been talking about this, but I have now reached the point. Now, I am a New York Giants fan. I will admit it. I bleed blue. But Daniel Jones, forget about it, folks. I understood why the Giants re-signed him. I got it. I understand that. This guy is running for his life. It was a TV series in 1960. Ben Gazzara was the star. In 2023, it's Daniel Jones. Run for your life. I watched the beginning of that game last week. He had no protection. He has no blocking up front. He is running to get away from people. Miami should have killed the Giants. They should have put a 70 burger on him. The Giants defense is the only thing that's keeping him there, but the Giants defense wasn't that good either. And Jones, with the neck injury, I don't think this is going to be a long-term thing. In fact, he'll probably play this week. They have a Sunday night game against Buffalo. Can you imagine how Buffalo is going to play after losing overseas in England? This is a team that lost to the Jets week 1, in which, Aaron Rodgers went after 4 plays, excuse me. They're going to be pissed. The Giants' offensive line is horrible. The Giants' offense is horrible. In fact, they're even talking about the Giants may look to deal Saquon Barkley, and he's their offense. So what does it tell you? Export Daniel Jones. I had him on a couple of teams, dumped him. And again, I'm a Giant fan, and I'm dumping Daniel Jones. What does that tell you, folks? All right, how about some imports for you? First of all, I'm going to go with Mikey's team. Jonathan Mingo. He's a guy that has been kind of on the bottom. People have talked about him. He was, a couple of fantasy writers were high on him and stuff. But Jonathan Mingo showed some signs of life in week 5. And he would be a guy who probably is going to do better in the second half of the season, especially since Carolina, listen, they're not going to get any worse. They're going to get better. Bryce Young just has to get comfortable at quarterback. And Young was out for a couple games with a concussion. Again, Jonathan Mingo is a guy who I think second half of the year could pay dividends. So I would pick him up. And he is available probably in most leagues since he's owned in under 10% of the leagues. Another guy who I'm looking at in tight end, we were talking about the situation with Travis Kelce, Logan Thomas in Washington. Now, he's still available in over 80% of the leagues. And this is a guy who, he looked as good as he's looked in the last 2 years. Sam Howell locked into the middle of the field. So Thomas, tight end 1 until proven otherwise. He's a guy who is available. He can help you out, especially in the tight end category, because listen, there aren't a lot of good tight ends. Logan Thomas is somebody you can count on. Just the injury thing is really what you got to watch out for. Last but not least, my last import is Amari DeMercado from Arizona. Now, the reason we're going with him, he is somebody who I would say definitely is available. And remember, he looked good because James Conner's now out on IR for 4 weeks. And DeMercado could play a role similar to Kyron Williams, who was RB5 in scoring, do that huge role and also 5 TDs. But think about this. This is a Cardinals team that was expected to go nowhere, and they have surprised. This guy is going to have some fantasy impact. Now, they've got another running back, but they're trying to work him in. So this is the guy who's going to get a lot of the calls. He is available. And then there's a TikTok I follow. Max Loeb is a fantasy football does TikToks, and he was so high on this guy. He said, sprint to the waiver wire to pick him up this week. So I sprinted to the waiver wire and I picked him up, except in one league. Somebody else beat me to it. But still, this is a guy who I think is going to help you out. And those are our import exports for this week. Mike, we're past the quarter pole of the season. We are now turning into the second quarter of the season. And as you said, yes, there are some teams that are not doing well. 1-4, 0-5, 2-3. 2-3 is not bad. 2-3 is not bad. You're still in the hunt.
Not bad.
Unless you got somebody who's 5-0 in your league, and some leagues do. But realistically, this is when you're going to make hay. And I want to go back to something I had talked to you about. I've said this, I've stressed this. I'm going to keep stressing it. This is something you've got to really look at, is take a look a week ahead on your buys. Because listen, if you, even in the best laid plans of mice and men, you didn't realize you had so many players on a week 7 buy. I'm just saying, it's not going to surprise you if you take a look a week ahead and you kind of plan ahead. You pick up some guys. Remember, you don't want to cut. You were mentioning Jordan Addison. I have him on my bench. I've started him a couple of games, but I've had him on my bench because I've got better wide receivers. And he's not a guy I'm going to let go. But, we talked about Devon at Chin. Well, I let him go in one league because I thought, I got to get somebody else. And I had another piece of the puzzle I needed. How many fantasy managers over the years have been burned by bye weeks because they are not prepared? And again, working a week ahead will help you. Take a look, this weekend, take a look at week 7. just get ahead, see who your buys are, see if you've got replacements, and maybe hit the waiver wire before the games on Sunday. And again, because if you do a waiver transaction, it won't be processed till after the games, obviously. If you can, get somebody ahead of time, be a good idea. But you understand where I'm going with this, and we preach this. You've got to kind of stay ahead of the game, because if you go the week of, it's sometimes difficult because everybody's going to want the hot defense. Kansas City defense was hot this week. Oh, let's see, they're playing the Broncos. Oh, I can understand why. But that was a hot defense. Well, the other thing I would say to you, I got him in the one league I went after him for. The other thing I'm going to say to you is, don't be afraid to put in 2 waiver claims involving the same player. And I say this because if you put in a waiver claim, and let's say just Kansas City and Miami's defense, I'm going to use that as an example. So I put in a claim for each of the defense. I use the same player, because what will happen is, if you get your first choice, the other claim will get thrown out because you don't have the player. That's fine. You got who you want. If for some reason you don't get your first choice, you've got a second choice. Nothing wrong with that. You're not penalized by that unless it costs you money for transactions. But I think you'd have to have the transaction go through. So that's another way to kind of play the angle here to get somebody you want. Don't sit there and put one claim in, because then you'll be like, oh, I didn't get him. What do I do now? And then you're stuck going down probably 5 or 6 defenses, where if you go the first 2, remember how the waiver wire works, it goes down from descending order. You could maybe get luck out and get something else in there, right?
That is for certain. Yes, you want to make those moves, and you want to make them, it's called being proactive and not being passive. And yes, you want to make those moves in advance. Yes, that's right. Aggressive versus passive. That's right. Always be on top of things. Remember, you want to win each and every week. This is the goal of fantasy football, winning your games. So what do you got to do to win? You got to take chances. You got to be aggressive. You got to use that waiver wire, like we mentioned. I mean, injuries are going to happen. We know it. Did we expect Justin Jefferson to have an injury? No, we didn't. No. The guy's been healthy for 3 seasons. Now he finally gets injured, and he's out for 4 games. It could be a little bit longer. I'm thinking it's a 4-week injury, but we'll see what the Vikings decide to do. But again, going back to the statement I made earlier, I don't think the Vikings are going to throw the towel in on him. I think we're going to see more of Justin Jefferson. By the way, that number 1A that I mentioned and 1B, Christian McCaffrey, Justin Jefferson, I don't think this is a Jonathan Taylor situation of last year. Remember, Jonathan Taylor was just like swiped by Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey ran away with it. They're neck and neck going into this week. Now, Jefferson had the injury, so let's give the edge to McCaffrey for the next 4 weeks unless McCaffrey gets injured. But, right now, you have to be pretty happy with if you drafted Justin Jefferson. Now, he got injured, but you got to be pretty happy with the production that he's turned out as well. So I don't think all hope is lost for Justin Jefferson.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And you mentioned Jonathan Taylor. If you are a Jonathan Taylor owner, don't despair. You just had the 1 week because of the fact that, he just got signed, just got back. I think he is somebody who is going to be around, and I think you're going to get some good production. And again, if he's a guy you drafted and you stashed him on your bench, it's going to pay off for you. We give you the nuggets. We tell you what you should do. We give you the imports, exports. We want to help you win. The Fantasy Sultans, he is the Hall of Famer Mike Scheck. I am Tripp Rogers. Love to hear your comments and questions. Just email fantasysultans@gmail.com. You can find our podcast on YouTube. Just search for the Fantasy Sultans, and also Spotify for podcasters. Again, search for the Fantasy Sultans. Oh, by the way, if you like the music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you listen to it while you're getting ready for your fantasy games, you turn to WTRSradio.com online. We'll be back again next week, week number 7. Man, we are just getting through there.
We're cruising.
We are going to make sure that you do well in fantasy football. We are the Fantasy Sultans.
And you are not.